Hello, readers of John Rowe Blogspot and Positive Liberty. I decided to do another video blog cast. It's at night right now that I'm recording this, and I think that's a good thing because I've recorded a couple of these clips in the day, and you got the back of my window right there. The sunlight comes in. The lighting doesn't look that good. The lighting, I think, looks a lot better at night. I'm not a professional, so I don't really know how to make this stuff look real great. All I know is I have a $90 webcam, and I can just turn it on and record and use it. A couple things to talk about, which you may or may not find interesting, but I think maybe for some of you it's nice of you to see my face and hear my voice. A couple weeks ago, I was going to blog about this. I didn't blog about it, so I guess I'll just talk about it now. One of my idols called me a bird brain. I kind of started it. I went onto YouTube, where he has his YouTube site up, and I called him a crackpot. This guy's name is Neal Adams, and he's one of the greatest comic book artists of all time. And he's also an armchair scientist, and he's got this completely insane idea that the Earth is growing. The Earth was much smaller, that there was no water on the Earth, that it was all land, and that the Earth in its inside core is this matter-pumping factory, and the Earth got a whole lot bigger from the inside out, and I guess for some reason most of the mass that the Earth must have accumulated was water or something like this. Just this real crazy idea, and P.Z. Myers, he called him a crackpot, rightly so. He also called him an artistic hack, but that's not true. Neal Adams is one of the best, if not the greatest, comic book artist of all times. He is innovative, one of the greatest innovators in comic book history, known for his anatomy, his detail. Certainly one of the most influential artists, probably second to only Jack Kirby. Now I know some of you are thinking, well, comic book art, even if it's great comic book art, it's not real art, right? Wrong. You're wrong if you believe that. The analogy that I might make to comic book art would be rock music to classical music. Now, there's rock music, and what the greatest rock musicians have accomplished probably is not quite up there as compared to Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, and so on and so forth. And indeed, some of the people who are classical music snobs snub their nose at rock music, and they don't consider any of it real art. Well, the point is, there's different levels of real art. There's the Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart up here, and then there's the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, who didn't quite work at that same high intellectual level of human achievement, but in their own way, they made great music, great art. I would say, you've got the masters, you've got the Leonardo da Vinci's, the Michelangelos, and so on and so forth. And the great comic book artists are sort of like, the rock and roll musicians. They're like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and Neal Adams would be like, the Beatles of comic book art. Here's a graphic. I couldn't afford to buy all of the originals of this comic book because they probably cost me way too much money, but I got a graphic novel that reprinted a lot of these. It was the Kree-Skrull War. I'm in the process of reading this. Not only does it have some great Neal Adams stuff, but it also has some stuff by the late, great John Buscema, who was also another one of the great innovators of the 1960s and 1970s. He actually started off in the... John Buscema, like Neal Adams, made his mark in the 1960s, and he worked all the way up until he died, which was a few years ago. He had a wonderful run on the Avengers. I have almost all of the stuff that John Buscema did with Tom Palmer in the 1980s on the Avengers. But let me show you. Let me show you some of this wonderful detail. If you can see it, I'm not sure if the webcam can capture some of the greatness of Neal Adams' art. I don't think it can, unfortunately. But anyway, it's kind of sad, because just because someone is an expert or really great, really brilliant, really innovative in one field doesn't necessarily mean that he or she will have anything worth listening to in another field. By way of an analogy, maybe Noam Chomsky comes to mind. Chomsky, of course, is a brilliant, did groundbreaking work in linguistics, but has absolutely no bona fides in political theory. He has his PhD in linguistics. That's where he's done his groundbreaking work. He has no credentials whatsoever in international politics. Yet that's what he's most notably recognized for, and I'd say he's sort of a crackpot in that area. Some people might disagree. You don't necessarily need a PhD in a particular subject matter in order to be an expert. Some people think Noam Chomsky is worth listening to, but I think you understand my reasoning. Just because someone does something great in area X doesn't necessarily mean in area Y they're going to do anything that's worthwhile. I went on to Neal Adams' YouTube site when I was talking back and forth with him, and I told him that, and I said, I teach business classes in community college. I've taught a basic economics course. You teach about opportunity costs. The more time you spend on X, the less time you have for Y. Neal Adams owes it to the world to spend as much time as he can doing art, whether it be comic book art or other types of art. He actually, if any of you guys have seen the Roger Waters tour and you see these big illustrations in the back, that's Neal Adams along with another comic book artist, Bill Sienkiewicz, I'm not sure how you pronounce that guy's name, doing that artwork. Neal should spend most of his time doing that as opposed to chasing windmills, going after this crackpot theory where, there's basically no future in it. It's just a bunch of nonsense. It also sort of reminds me of Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was a brilliant scientist for his day, yet he also worked with alchemy and believed that there were hidden codes to be found in the Bible, and he spent a great deal of his time dealing with such nonsense. And it's unfortunate because all the time Isaac Newton spent with alchemy and with looking for the non-existent Bible codes, he could have even been spending more of that time doing groundbreaking, great scientific work. Now, I guess finally, to end on all the stuff, you may come away from this podcast thinking that I'm a little bit odd with my theory of comic book and art and whatnot. If you guys ever see the movie Unbreakable, I remind myself a little bit of the Samuel Jackson character, Mr. Glass in Unbreakable. No, not because I'm a psychopath like he was. He was a criminally insane psychopath. But if you remember in that movie, he took comic book art very seriously, and I take comic book art very seriously as well. My family, they have managed to, as they've aged, my mom and dad collect a fair amount of wealth, and my dad spends a lot of his extra money that he has on him buying, interesting things. He buys some interesting historical documents from the 17 and 1800s that, just pieces of paper that cost a lot of money. My mom kind of thinks he's nuts for it. He also has spent his money on these duck decoys, and so he's got this, duck decoy. One of them he spent $10,000 on something that's just a wooden thing that looks like a duck. As I age, I am probably going to start to buy, as I collect more wealth, original pieces of comic book art. That's how I plan on spending my superfluous wealth that I have. Alright, ooh, you can see lightning in the background. Thought maybe you would like to hear some of these interesting rambling thoughts of mine. Goodbye.